So, welcome to the Unity Guide Expert Interview Series. My name is Clayton Stenson. I'll be your host today. This series is brought to you by the Unity Guide, where we help develop Unity within companies running on the entrepreneurial operating system. We do this through fractional integrator services and coaching for the visionary and integrator, as well as their leadership team. Recently, I've been meeting with so many amazing people. I thought there has to be a way that I can take a piece of the conversations I have week in and week out and share them with the business community to add value. And one of those amazing people that I know is Emily Melious. Emily is a fulfillment coach, which is a term that I really love. And the topic that we're going to discuss today is the Kolbe assessment and how it relates to the visionary and second in command relationship. So welcome, Emily. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation today. It's going to be a good one.
Awesome. So Before we get into our interview, I just have one quick question for you. How did you become a fulfillment coach, and what is that?
Well, admittedly, I totally made up the title. So I didn't see anywhere else, but I use that title because really simply, I help people be more fulfilled at work. And my background is in more the HR genre and also with business strategy. So combining those two things, I work really both sides of the coin. So I help companies hire and develop top performers by creating a fulfilling workplace. And then I also coach individual high achieving professionals on how to be fulfilled at work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm guessing that's very fulfilling.
Well. Like, yes. Well, I wouldn't be a very good coach if I didn't practice what I preach. So sure, a lot of this is me eating my own peas and making sure that I am also being a good self-advocate and self-aware and making daily decisions and actions to foster my own fulfillment. But yes, I find this extremely fulfilling, what I get to do every day.
That's awesome. That makes life much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I know, the audience for this interview is generally EOS people that are some going to be familiar with Kolbe, but some are not. So what is a Kolbe assessment? Can you tell us a little bit about that? And you've been doing that for 17 years, I think it was.
Yes, good memory. So I was trained to utilize the Kolbe assessment 17 years ago and have administered at this point, I think I'm somewhere around 3,000 assessments. So good bit of those over that time period. I first experienced a Kolbe assessment when I was in 6th grade. And it was a game changer for me, even back then. And I've continued to see this particular set of insights really change businesses, lives, careers, just have a tremendous impact for people. So I use the tools in a lot of my engagements because they really are distinctive. Most people, particularly business people, have heard of some kind of assessment. Some of the popular ones are Predictive Index, DISC, Myers-Briggs, 16PF, Strengths Finders, just to name a few. But there's actually, last I heard, the count was there's over 800 assessments out there available. Yes, enough to make your head spin. And like any industry or set of resources, there are goods and bads and uglies, right? There are certainly some better in class and some ones that I would run, not walk away from, right? But what makes Kolbe special is that it really is in a league of its own in terms of what it measures and therefore what we can do with the insights. So to put it really simply, there are 3 parts of the human mind, and that is your thinking ability, your feeling, and your doing. So kind of what we know, why we do things, and how we do things. And every other assessment out there that isn't Kolbe, so everything else, including the ones that I mentioned earlier, measure some aspect of thinking or feeling. So your smarts or your emotions or personality. We can get into the details about how those are relevant to performance or fulfillment at work, but they have kind of their own, let's say, applications, right?
Yeah.
But Kolbe is the only assessment that exists to measure how a person instinctually, so by nature, when free to do things their own way, gets stuff done. So how they get results and take action when free to do it their own way. So Kolbe is not necessarily measuring what you were taught to do or even want to do. It's measuring how you do stuff. And the other thing that's compelling about that, well, there's a lot of things actually, but that's unique about it as compared to other type of psychological instruments, is that Kolbe is measuring something that's unchanging. So what many people may not realize is that personality is not permanent. Actually, a guy named Benjamin Hardy even wrote a book with that title. So those that are familiar with Dan Sullivan might know about that book. Benjamin Hardy, personality is not permanent. It's not permanent. Personality evolves. What we know, our skills, our experience, and training, it's not permanent. It evolves. But our modus operandi for getting stuff done is fixed. There's no training ourselves in or out of it. And we'll talk about the implication that has in the relationship between visionary and integrator. But the key here is this is a piece of non-negotiable insight, right?
Yeah.
It's always been true of you. It always will be true of you. So understanding the insights that Kolbe has to offer, and only Kolbe has to offer, is a critical component of successful working relationships and also personal relationships.
That's interesting. I wonder, and I wasn't planning to do this, but I wonder, I have my Kolbe on.
Yeah.
I wonder if we shouldn't like give an example, because I think that might help you understand. And I wasn't planning to go here, but here's my Kolbe. So why don't you describe kind of what the 4 areas are and what this means as an example for people?
Yes. Yeah. So as you can see, for those who are not just listening, but able to see our screen. So
a little bit. Here we go.
This perfect. So the organization, so Kolbe Corp. So I'm not a part of Kolbe Corporation. I just utilize their tools in my consulting work, and it's one of the tools in our toolboxes. But Kolbe Corporation has been around for something like 40 or 50 years at this point, and they've done a tremendous amount of research on this topic. So they're really more of a research company, a science company than anything else. And they're the leaders on researching this part of the brain, that doing component. So what we are compelled to do naturally in order to problem solve or get to a result. So Clayton, you and I can be equally motivated to go on an amazing family vacation, for example. But the actions you take to make that happen I can guarantee you, are different from the actions that I take, or even how you define an amazing family vacation will be different than how I define that. So we can be equally motivated to get to the same result, but the path that we take there, if you think of it as like your mental heat map, right? Where you're allocating energy, mental energy in your creative process is different. And this is really your mental heat map right here, the legend to the map. And so Kolbe Corp has figured out that there are 4 categories of taking action, and we all fall somewhere within those 4 categories. And the good news is that low numbers are just as good as high numbers. They're all strengths. They're just landing somewhere else. But that fact finder tube, the red one, tells us how much information you naturally give and also need. The follow-through tube, the blue one, talks about how much process or planning you need, how organized you are by nature or not. Quick start, the green tube, has everything to do with how you handle risk and uncertainty. What's your appetite, your innate appetite for risk? And then implementer, the gold tube. And I will say most people kind of get snagged on this one because we use the word implement, I find, in common language a bit differently than how it's meant here. So implementer in Kolbe terms is more speaking to like a noun, a physical implement, a tool. So this tube has to do with how physical you are in the problem solving process, how you engage tools or equipment or mechanics or your hands, your body in problem solving. So if you have a real long number there, you're probably somebody who is out in the field or out from behind the desk, or you're building, constructing, modeling. You're more of a craftsperson, for example. Whereas if you have a shorter number there, you're somebody who's going to really avoid those activities and really just be more conceptual or visualize solutions. So Clayton, your particular combination, we call a systems analyst. So you are systems first. Clayton is dependably dependable. The first thing you do when your brain goes into go mode is say, what's the plan? Mm-hmm. What are the steps? What's the timeline? And you go to the finish line and you work your way backwards. I always joke with folks like you, I envied you because you're the kid in high school who probably got those extra bonus points that I didn't get for handing your homework in early, because for you, to wait it right up until the last minute is stressful. It's too risky. So right. You really have that consistency about you and that flow. You really naturally tie things together into patterns or trends and think a lot about how the past, present, and future work together. So things aren't happening in vacuums, they happen in context. So for you, for example, like if somebody just gives you a task and doesn't tell you how it relates back to the bigger project, you're frustrated. Whereas if you know how that plugs in, you're more successful, right? So many things we could talk about there, but you're a routine guy, you're consistently consistent. You do things in an order, sequential, methodical way, and you're a promise keeper by nature. You do what you say you're going to do. You finish what you start. You're there on time. Okay, but close second is that you backfill with data. So you once you have that plan, once you have an outline for your ebook, for example, once you have your system in place, then you fill in the information gaps. And you are somebody who strives to be more of a specialist and expert of your craft. You know a lot about what it is you're talking a lot about. You get information gives you confidence. Information is power for you. You get a thrill out of the details, the nuances. You see the complexities and things to the point where, and I'll confess this is me, it's hard to give a yes or no answer because it depends, right? So
I need more information. I need context.
Exactly. Yep. So character fault, we leave long voicemail messages, right? Because it's like, got to give all the detail. So for my friends out there that don't live in the detail, I totally appreciate and value that, you can see the forest for the trees because we live in the bogged down sometimes. So anyways, but you have this wonderful combination to be thorough, but also to be systematic and routine and finish out what you start. All the while you risk mitigate. Doesn't mean you won't take risk or won't change anything ever, but you're doing your homework and making your plan and creating a worst case scenario. So you kind of know what's going to come out of this. So definitely you're not going to bet the farm if you don't have to. And you kind of do change and risk on your terms. And then you're a Goldilocks when it comes to being hands-on. So I don't know you that well, but I would think you probably have some hobbies that are more up behind your desk. Maybe you love shooting hoops with your kids after a long day of work.
I was shooting hoops this morning, actually. Oh, nice job.
Crazy. So there you go. So I fully expect that you have these physical outlets in your life where you're being active, maybe engaging with nature, or maybe some hobbies, woodworking.
I like camping. I like renovating. I love construction projects. So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, maybe working on the car. So you might not be the person that, you might not volunteer to take the engine apart in your car, but it's like if something breaks down, it's like, okay, this is kind of fun that I now have to work at it a little bit, investigate. But you're also the person that before you jump into a fix-it job, you're going to make sure that you have all of the tools you need and you have the time to start and finish the task before you jump in. You'll inventory everything. You'll lay it all out. You'll make sure not to get interrupted if you can help it. So even the process you have of going about fixing something, it's still really unique to you. You probably do some research, watch a couple YouTube videos, that kind of thing, rather than just like jumping in and
Yeah.
taking risk.
Yeah, it's
So,
funny.
go ahead.
I haven't had my wife do one of these yet, but I'm going to. We talked about that. But it's interesting when we decided we were going to learn how to snowboard. Guess how we did it? We didn't get lessons, but we watched YouTube videos and we learned how to do it before we were on the hill, and then we just did follow the system, right? And it
I was
worked
just
really
going to
well.
say the system. So you probably started incrementally, right? So we'll start doing these
Yep.
kinds of hills or these kinds of
Yep.
tricks. We'll build up
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah.
And you had a process in mind because that
Yeah.
was also not only process oriented, but de-risking, right? So we've got those folks with long green lines that are probably like,
They
I'm
just
going to the
strap it on
diamond.
and
I'm
go.
just going to try it, right?
What could happen, right?
If I fall, right? Or they cannonball into the deep end to learn how to swim. That's where we get the sink or swim mentality, right? I'm just going to go in and what happens, happens. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, that's such an excellent example of what Kolbe is measuring to bring this back around. So we can have 10 people who are all learning to snowboard, and they might all learn to snowboard by the end of the day, but we might get 10 completely different pathways of them doing that activity and approaching that result.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Kolbe is measuring. And we all probably have some thought or indication about where we land. But I will tell you, it is actually really hard to see ourselves objectively, and it's really hard to see other people objectively. And this is such a game changer when you can, in almost an instant, it's 20 minutes, 36 questions, feels pretty instantaneous to me, can shorten that learning curve and figure each other out fast.
Yeah.
And then how to satisfy each other's needs right off the bat. So, I know what you need right now and how you approach new tasks. And I can be better at serving you and communicating with you and making sure that I'm not causing you extra stress or friction. Or our relationship causing extra stress or friction in that either, because I see how you function best and I can honor that more easily.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good segue into the into the next part. So would you say in your experience, and I don't know how much experience you've had coaching visionaries and integrators or either or, would you say that my score is probably typical, you think, of an integrator, second in command type?
Sure. Yeah. And there's some variability in there, right? But I think it's fair to say that the visionaries tend to have those long green lines or longer quick start lines, because by nature, that person is visionary, that they're forward thinking, they're future thinking, they're risk based. So it's not surprising that they've started a company, that they, again, sort of live in the future. They're the idea person. They're the big picture thinker. They might also have a good dose of that red line as well. Some of that fact finder to be more strategic, to, have ideas of alternatives and not just have the idea, but have the argument or research and data to kind of get the bank to support the idea and win them over. Yeah. So we see that at the visionary level, but then that integrator level often has, much like you, more of that operations function as a person, right? So it's more about efficiency and effectiveness and systematizing, operationalizing things, but also being thorough and accurate and, strategic, of course, but not really having competing visions, but really taking that vision from that top person and, again, operationalizing it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because here's where we get into the hairiness of it, right? Because oftentimes visionaries recognize what they don't do well or doesn't come naturally, and they will want to hire the complete opposite, right? So somebody to fill in all the gaps. If I'm way over here, I want somebody completely on the other side. And so they may hire someone with almost an opposite MO. And while that thought process makes sense on some level, it can actually create conflict in the business because it's like that. It's like oil and vinegar. Those people are so different that it's hard to find common ground. So I do often encourage, I mean, and there's sophisticated ways that we do teaming, data informed teaming, right? So we're using this insight and we're scientifically coordinating individuals and teams to be as synergistic as possible. And so we can coordinate that and not just play hunches. But I will encourage those listening, one of the takeaways here is we don't want clones. We don't need another Emily. We don't need another Clayton.
Yeah.
But we also want to steer clear of conflict. We want to be careful that we don't get that person who's totally opposite, but actually we're looking for what I would call a complement. So somebody that, yes, brings different strengths and approaches to the table and to the organization, but is not so far removed from you that you're speaking completely different languages. So finding that complement to you, and that's going to be probably the dream team when it comes to that visionary integrator relationship. But to answer your original question, yes, we're going to see different MOs tend to fall into those roles just because they require different things of those individuals.
So for example, if you had like a 10 quick start visionary and a 0 integrator, quick start integrator, that would be hard. Right?
It would just, yes. And I've seen it happen. And it is really like them having completely different languages. Someone speaking German, someone speaking French. One goes left, one goes right. And you can appreciate that person, right? We see in loving relationships, there's a lot of married couples who do things in a completely opposite way. But they love each other. And that's an affective or emotional based relationship. And those couples tend to say, oh, we love each other, we're happily married, but we should never work together. Right? Or don't make us pay bills together, right? He does these things in the household. I do these things in the household, right? Or going on a family vacation can be a little dicey. Whereas in a working relationship, which is what we're talking about here, again, you can like that person, be best friends with that person, want to go hang out with them at happy hour. But you got to be careful when you're working with someone and choosing who you're working with, that it's not identical, but it's not opposite. We're looking for that slightly uncomfortable middle ground where that person pushes you push one another outside of the comfort zone, but not to the point of it kind of being a non-starter.
So where would you say, like, what would be the gap that's reasonable?
I love your drive for specificity here. So there's a rule for those of us that really like clear, concise rules here. It's a rule of 4. And that is a difference of 4 or more equals conflict. So if we have a 10 in Fact Finder, once we start getting into 6, 5, 4, and below in Fact Finder, it's going to be frustrating. So we really maybe want to go for an 8 or a 7 there. But there's also 4 modes. So you've got to coordinate all 4 modes correctly. And then we're also coordinating to the demands of the position itself. So this is where it helps to hire somebody like me. Shameless plug here, but because there are nuances to this, right? And so having somebody who has experience coordinating these different results and tying them back to the demands of the job, because we've got a 10 in Fact Finder, their best complement might be a 7, say, but then we also have to look at, well, does the job they're performing require them to be very detailed and specialized and thorough? Or is it demanding something else of them? So coordinating all of those components is totally possible, but I caution folks from taking a DIY approach when it comes to the assessments, because it really is an area of extensive and sophisticated training that we go through. So we're making sure that we're helping business owners and key business players make smart decisions around this.
Yeah, I think for myself, I'm 45 now, and I never started doing assessments till I was around 30, and I just found that it was so valuable, right, to
Mhm.
increase my awareness of who I am and why I am the way that I am, and as I've kind of grown, and I did Strengths Finder probably about 5 years ago, and then I did some other ones as well over the years, and I've just learned who I am and what makes me tick and why certain things bother me, and so on. So I just think it's valuable if you've never done any assessments or never done Kolbe or anything like this. Like it's good to do it and have somebody who can kind of help you interpret it for sure. Um,
Well, I always talk about it shortens the learning curve.
mhm,
Um, or if you think about it, maybe a different analogy here is when you get a new dance partner. I'm
mhm,
not the best dancer, but if you think of you have a new dance partner, and when you're initially getting to know each other, what do? You step on each other's toes.
mhm,
You're not in sync, you're not in rhythm yet. Now, will you eventually get there?
mhm.
Sure. Yeah, you will. You get into that rhythm, you kind of start to anticipate each other's moves. You you're both feeling the music in the same way. What their idiosyncrasies are, right? And you know how to respond to that. But that
Yeah,
takes time, and you step on each other's toes a lot in between and get frustrated by that.
yeah,
So when we get a new dance partner at work, we get a new partner, we get a new collaborator, we get new team members, or maybe we're working with people in different capacity. I want to shorten that learning curve and minimize how much we're stepping on each other's toes.
mhm,
So a lot of times when I come into a situation, people will say, "Oh, yeah, like this confirms or validates something I've seen." So, we would hope that the results are not totally out of left field, right? They shouldn't come from such a place of surprise that it's, worrisome, like how did nobody see this? But it's more it's validating, it expedites that getting to know each other so we can just jump right into the dance routine and
yeah,
pulling it off
yeah,
smoothly and perfectly without bumping it into each other all along the way, and
yeah.
making it hard there for that initial start.
I have a question that's kind of out of left field. What if
Okay.
your scores are really similar? Does that make it easier?
In some ways it does, but I actually feel that clones are the most cancerous to an organization, the most dangerous to an organization, because it's a problem that no one knows is a problem.
Mm,
So what happens when you get, and it compounds, right? So two people with the same MO, don't necessarily go having people leave your organization because of that, because of this
mhm,
conversation. But if you start to stack MOs, and that happens a lot. So we'll get maybe a business leader or a hiring manager that have a bias towards their own way of doing things, and they may or may not be aware of that bias, but they
yeah,
might be somebody who's really detailed and thorough, and they think everybody else should be detailed and thorough. So when they ask interview questions, how would you approach this? And the person says, well, I do a lot of researching first, and I would check out all the options and alternatives. And they go, that's a good way to do things. I'm going to hire you. Right.
yeah, yeah,
Obviously oversimplifying a little bit, but they keep hiring themselves basically. And
yeah.
they might have different skills or motivators, but how they approach problem solving, how they do their work is essentially the same. And when we stack that in an organization, we get groupthink,
Mhm,
where everybody thinks everything's going great. They're patting each other on the back. Yes, I love how you're doing it. I was going to do it the exact same way, right? Yes, we need to ask more questions before we move forward with that. Yes, we should refine the agenda before we have the meeting. If you get too many folks with that long red line, the initiating fact finders is what we call them, you get complete analysis paralysis in an organization. And they have no idea it's a problem until it's too late.
right.
So that's why I think it's most dangerous. People know conflict is happening. If you've got somebody who operates completely opposite you, you pretty much know in the first 24 hours, whoa, okay, we don't work the same. At least you're aware of the issue. Cloning is dangerous because everybody thinks it's fine and it can go for 10 or 15 years. And you'll wake up one day and realize that you've remained completely stagnant. The curse of cloning is zero advancement. And interestingly enough, it doesn't matter which mode is cloned. So even if you have a ton of quick starts together, which is that green mode, right? And they're the people who are always having ideas about how to change things, right? So you might think even then, the company remains stagnant.
I'd say it's chaos.
Well, right? It's just like what happens, and hey, we're all guilty. I'll raise my hand to this too. When a bunch of leaders from organizations go off to those big conferences that are all ideas, right, based, and they've changed the world 10 times over, and their teams know, give it a week, right? That person comes back from that conference, talks all these big ideas. They're changing this, they're changing that, and everybody says, give it a week, right?
Yeah, I'll actually just drop a nugget here for any integrators that are listening. Yeah, I got this from an implementer that I think is great. And what he said was, that's what the long-term issues list is for. If your visionary comes back from a conference and has 100 ideas, tell them, you know what, right now we need to be focused on this for this quarter. So let's put that on the long-term issues list, and we'll come back to that, at the next quarterly. And what he said was, most likely they won't even remember.
Forget it. I know. Yes. But as somebody, so I'm built more like a visionary, and I can speak to, it's this idea of not wanting to lose the idea. So there's so much relief in it being captured. But those folks, the visionaries, also operate best out of a sense of urgency and pressure. And priorities. So saying, hey, this is the focus. This is what needs to happen now. There's a time box around this. There's a deadline. There's pressure. For the integrator, that kind of language might be stressful, but for the visionary, that's motivating. So I love what you did there, where you're giving them the relief of saying, we're going to honor the idea. We're not going to lose it. It's going to get stashed somewhere, but here's what's pressure filled. Perfect.
That's good. So I know we're coming near to the end of our time, but any final word or comments to visionaries and integrators? Like maybe they're in a situation where maybe they are more than 4 apart on something. Like what would you say, from that perspective?
Yeah. So 2 things I would say. And the first is, I call this getting cognitive. So get cognitive. So when somebody does something in a different way than you have to stop and think a little harder, right? So I think about this with my kids. One of my kids is wired a lot like me. One of my kids is not at all wired like me, right? So for my oldest, who's a lot like me, I can kind of jump right in and help him problem solve and give him advice, and we just kind of roll with it together. With my second, if I do that, I stress him out more and probably ends up, crying or, Mom, you're making me stressed, right?
Yeah.
So I have to stop in that moment and think harder. Okay, what would I do? Set that aside. What does he need? How can I be helpful to him? What are his needs and gaps, and what advice is best for him right now? So get cognitive, think harder. And is that more taxing? Yeah, but just, you got to kind of switch into that mode. The second piece of advice I'll give is, this might sound sort of counterintuitive to what we said earlier, but lean into or embrace the difference. So rather than fighting it, take advantage of that difference. So for my husband and me, for example, so I am a 7 in Quick Start. He is a 1 in Quick Start. We absolutely break the rule of 4. Okay. Now we're in a loving romantic relationship, not a working relationship. So, keeping that in mind, but it would be easy for me to get frustrated with him, because I often hear someone in my position, and visionaries might be able to identify with this, where it's like, I have all these ideas, I express them, I'm excited to share them, and my husband or the integrator just tells me all the reasons why they won't work, right? They just shoot them down, right? so negative, or
Yep.
we start taking that difference of approach as a
Yeah.
personal assault, right? Somebody's doing it to
Right.
me,
Right.
or we put it in an emotional or personality ring, the realm. They're being negative, right? Whereas that's not going on at all. So instead of fighting my husband's perspective, I embrace or invite it. So I will go to him now and say, okay, sweetie, I've got some big ideas. Poke holes in them for me, please. Like, tell me, I
Yeah.
invite you to tell me where I'm going to fall flat on my face, because I'd much rather fall on my face in a conversation with you
Yeah.
who love me
Yeah.
at the end of the day than in front of my clients.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
or, if you're somebody who's really detailed and thorough and you have somebody in your world who's very high level, say, please pull out all the unnecessary information. Please pull this down, something more concise, right? So really inviting that, and that can put you in an uncomfortable place. But the more you do it, the less uncomfortable, I guess, more comfortable it becomes.
Mhm.
And you start to really appreciate the differences that that person brings to the table.
Yeah. That's good. That's awesome. Awesome advice. Yeah. That's what very similar to what I coach my clients with. It's like you need to embrace the differences, learn to appreciate them, go that extra mile to understand the other person and leverage that gift because it's a gift. May not feel like it, right?
Well, and I'll add one more piece of advice is
Yeah.
don't always collaborate. Don't always collaborate. I think agree on the target. What's the end result? Are we both highly motivated and engaged? That's what you should always share. So
Mhm.
I talk about unify, excuse me, it's the end of the day and I can't get my words out as well today, but unify on values, diversify on approach. So to use your word, what we need to be unified on is where are we going and who are we as people getting there? What does our character look like? What values are we embracing along the path? But you do you and me do me, right? So if you
Yeah.
need to go do some research and I need to go create a step-by-step plan, great. I think that collaboration, which is great, has been maybe overhyped or force fit into a
Right.
lot of business
Right.
situations. Whereas if we just allow each other the freedom to work independently and report back at certain, critical checkpoints, that's
Mhm.
okay too.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Awesome. So thank you so much, Emily. This has been really good. I think this is going to help a lot of people. So if someone wanted to learn more about your coaching and and what you do, how would they get in touch with you?
Perfect. So if you are a business leader, business owner, and you want to create that more fulfilling workplace for both yourself and your team, then the best place to go is launchconsulting.io, launchconsulting.io. And if you are a mid-career professional who's listening and you just want a more fulfilling career, you might be very successful in what you do, but just lack that fulfillment piece, and are looking for some coach to really be in your corner on your journey, then go to emilymelious.com. So of course my name there, emilymelious.com, and you'll find some great resources there and some ways that I can help you there.
So thank you. So on behalf of our viewers, thank you for joining us today, Emily, and thank you for sharing your passion on this topic. I'm sure that it will be impactful for people. So if today's interview added value to you, please subscribe to this channel for future interviews with experts in the world of business.